Hello minders, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Well, is there anything more exciting than brand new colors? Yeah, I know, we need new colors like we need a hole in the head, but I mean, it's just cool when somebody comes out with something and pushes the competition and the envelope a little bit, and this is something new. Now actually, Schmincke introduced these are Schmincke paints. They introduced these in July of last year. These are 6 colors out of the Schmincke Super Granulating range. Very kind of unique range. They started out with 15 colors. They're being sold in individual tubes or in these anniversary sets, little wooden box sets of 5 colors each with a color theme. Color themes, the first 3 were Galaxy, Glacier, and Deep Sea. And I have some of those colors here. Recently, they've added 2 more, Forest and Tundra. Great landscape colors. So now the range has been extended to 25 colors. And they're just really, really kind of cool. Obviously, I'm not going to buy the whole 25 colors, and I don't recommend that you do. They are very, very redundant in some cases. There's a lot of unique colors, a lot of unique things that they do and the way they granulate. We'll talk about that in a second. But there are some very redundant colors here and some that you just probably don't want, depending on what you have in your collection. So what makes these super granulating? Well, I don't know that there's so much super granulating as what they've done is combined 2 or 3 pigments in every color. All granulating pigments, and the pigments separate out at different rates. Those of you who are Daniel Smith Primatech fans will be most familiar with this effect. The Primatechs, the semi-precious stones, they tend to separate out. You know, one of my favorites is Apatite Green Genuine. When it gets into a granulation situation, you see actually 2 colors emerging in various ways that it mingles. That's sort of the unique aspect to this granulation. If you had a pure pigment such as ultramarine blue, which is a granulating color, you wouldn't get that. You might get some granulation, but you wouldn't get that separation into 2 different components. So if you're interested in this range, keep that in mind. Number 1, there's a lot of redundancies, so you want to check out which colors might appeal to you. Secondly, it's going to be a situation where you don't mind seeing the colors separate into their components when they do granulate. And thirdly, just granulation in general, which gives you a grainy sort of a mottled look. Now I'm going to recommend to you, if you want to pick out some colors out of this range, go and check out Dr. Otto Kano's YouTube channel. She's doing a whole series on this, and she's reviewing every color in the range in great detail. She's 3 episodes into what I think is going to be a 6-episode series, and I've been watching them all with interest. She just gives you a very good detailed look at each individual color, and she gives her thoughts on them. Me, I'm just going to talk about the range in general, and we're going to do what I love to do with new supplies, and that's we're going to do a little spontaneous doodle. We're going to see how maybe in a little doodle we could actually utilize that granulation. Let's take a closer look at the 6 colors that I chose. Starting on the left, this is Glacier Brown. And keep in mind, as I said, they combine 2 pigments in every color. Now you don't see them too much in the swatch here, but I did a wash on the back to get the most effect with the granulation. Isn't that cool? I mean, you can see very distinctly the 2 colors separating out in various ways. You can see the graininess. It goes from smooth to grainy depending on how much water you use, how much pigment. That's granulation. And this is extreme compared to many cases of granulation. This is the overall tone though. It's a sort of an umberish color. That's Glacier Brown. Next up is Galaxy Brown from the Galaxy series. Again, 2 colors if you're into the pigment numbers. More of a reddish brown. But here again we see the granulation in a wet variegated wash. You can see the violet element and then the more red-brown element. Just absolutely beautiful granulation. I really suspect that Schmincke has done this to compete with the Daniel Smith Primatechs. That's what it would seem like. The difference being that they don't use semi-precious stones. They use standard paint artist grade pigments. And one thing I will say, I did find that compared to the Primatex, these re-wet a little bit easier after they've dried. That depends on the color. Some of the Daniel Smiths re-wet pretty well. Some of them are very, very hard to re-wet. I found all these to re-wet a little bit easier. All right, so next up, another favorite, Deep Sea Violet. Again, 2 pigment numbers there. You see some granulation, but that's the overall hue. Here's the granulation and separation where I tried to push that. It's hard to see but on camera, but there's sort of a blue, obviously the ultramarine number, and then you can see the warmer elements, which is the PBR pigment, separating out. Another really cool one, I thought. Loved that. This turned out to be the least favorite of the 6 that I picked, since I didn't think it was all that dramatic. Not much better than a cobalt blue or an ultramarine blue in your own collection, so I'm not sure. You do see some separation though. You can see the cooler blue and the warmer blue kind of separating out. So it's got its usage, but probably not one I would have picked had I seen or been able to do this first. Another one that I really, really liked, Deep Sea Green from the Deep Sea series. And look at that. Isn't that cool? Just a beautiful, interesting separation of pigments. All right, so lastly, we have Deep Sea Black. They had some pretty interesting blacks in this line. This one seemed to be the most interesting as far as I could tell. It's just a very neutral black. It's sort of a blue black, and you can see why if you look at the pigment numbers. It's a Mars black with a cobalt and a cerulean aspect to it. It doesn't show up real well on camera, but there's some very definite blue patches in here. And of course you can see the heavy granulation. But as blacks go, it's pretty interesting, I think. You know, and you can add blacks like this that granulate heavily to other colors, even non-granulating ones, and get some pretty cool granulating effects, especially Mars black. So that rounds out the 6 colors that I chose. Now here in the States, you know, I've always found that Schmincke is very expensive and hard to get. There's only a few retailers. You usually have to order it from places like Cheap Joe's or Blick or Jerry's Artarama. I know Jackson's in the UK has got all of the sets. They're the only retailer I saw that did. There are probably others, and oddly enough, Schmincke doesn't even have much on their website about these yet. They're pretty slow in updating their website information. You might be better off to actually go someplace like Jackson's or, as I mentioned, Autocano's YouTube channel and get additional comments and thoughts on what this is. But if you're not at all familiar with Schmincke, it's a world-class, top-quality watercolor. Always has been. Excellent tradition, excellent paint. So you don't have to worry there. Now if you are a new beginner, don't have any idea what granulation's about, don't understand it at all, I've got a video that I did about 4 years ago. I will link to that down in the description, so go check that out and we'll describe a little bit more what it's about. But simply put, and just the shorthand, granulation is a more grainy, textured look to your watercolors. It happens in a lot of single pigment watercolors, and of course, as I've already mentioned, they're pushing the envelope with combining pigments in these to get the separation effect. So as I mentioned, I want to do a doodle, and we'll talk about pushing the granulation in your work, actually making it happen, or basically pulling back so that it doesn't happen. Yes, you can do that with granulating colors. You can apply them so they granulate little or not at all. I'm going to use these 3 and do a little limited palette doodle. These were my favorites. It's the Deep Sea Green, the Glacier Brown, and the Deep Sea Violet. Lovely, lovely, lovely. All right, so I've got my Winsor Newton Pro watercolor paper. I do a lot of testing in this little book. It's a great paper. And some more swatches here. What I'm demonstrating with these swatches, just wanted you to see that it is possible to apply granulating colors without having them granulate. I think there's a little bit of a myth going around out there that they're always going to come out looking granular. They're not. It depends, of course, on how you apply and what kind of water ratio you use. But you can see these here are completely and totally flat. There's almost no granularity. The secret is just getting an evenly wet brush rather than a soaked brush. And pick up some of the Galaxy Brown. The key is the water. You don't want a soaked brush. You don't want water sitting on top. So if you do a wash, that will go down on dry paper fairly dryly, and then make sure you pick up any pool. What pushes granulation is pooling water of varying amounts, like a real wet droplet or area over here, a real dry area, a clump of more pigment here, a clump of less over there. If you're a beginner, you need to be able to do perfect flat washes practically in your sleep. I believe that's just a control issue. Even if you're going to be a loose painter, I would learn to do that because it teaches you water pigment ratio. When you get to the point where you want to force granulation, you can put it down wetter. Let it pool in places. I don't have a lot of pigment in my brush, so this is going to be fairly weak. Maybe get some clear water, add it in places. The more uneven your wash in terms of pigment and water, the more it varies, the more likely you're going to see granulation. Look at that. That's that violet component is already separated out, which means it's a heavier component than this brown one. Really awesome. Just really awesome. That's the same color as this, the Galaxy Brown. So that's just a little primer for you beginners who don't know anything about granulation or how to make it happen or how to avoid it more if you want to avoid it. Also, I'm not going to demonstrate it here, but on cold press paper like this, granulation tends to disperse a little more in more even patterns, even though these are not what I'd call even. However, if you did it on hot press, because it's a slicker, smoother surface, the granulation tends to go a little more wild. And it's a little more unpredictable yet. So that's how paper can affect it. I also find it's a little easier to get a smooth wash on cold press paper. Not so much, maybe, but a little bit. So I hope those granulation tips help. All right, so let me do this doodle. I'm going to use this oval wash by Princeton, 1/2" oval wash. This will allow me to get some points, but also some wide washes and put a lot of water on the paper. Rather than evenly wet the whole thing, I'm just going to wet it in places. That'll give me some interesting rivulets, and that ought to really, really push the granulation, really force it. This will just be a doodle. These are great exercises though. That's pretty cool right there. Starting to see some of that separation. I think I don't have the tube in front of me. I think this has a greenish component in it. See it separating out there. Oh man, just exciting. Let me pull in the deep sea green. Mingle a little of that violet in there. Just for kicks. I mean, that's so dramatic there in that Galaxy Brown. I'm sorry, the Glacier Brown. It looks like I painted it with 2 colors, and I think that's the point. And you Daniel Smith Primatech users, take note, because this is exactly what you can do with a lot of those colors. Now, in a case like this where the wash is starting to dry, there's less water, you get less separation. Now, if I wanted to dab in maybe a little bit of clear water to create a bit of a background, sometimes that will help you push granulation a bit. Because especially in dual color or dual pigment mixes like that, because some of the pigment will stay in the paper and some of it will move. Most all of these super granulating colors, most all granulating colors really, are pretty easy to lift. They're not highly staining. That's true of these super granulating ones. Get a lot of water right there. Just, I want to see that do something. A lot of nice texture throughout. The only place I have seen a lot of separation of components is in that glacier brown, probably because that was the most water applied. I'm just creating little backgrounds here, some little features. As it starts to dry, I'm just tapping in some little darker pops here and there. I'm going to let that dry. I think that's a good base to paint on. Alright, we'll do a little detailing here for the fun of it. Same colors, you can even mix them. This is like some of the galaxy brown, a little bit of the violet, deep sea violet. You can glaze with this. It will lift easier than the more staining colors. So usually when you glaze, you're going from really light layers to darker layers. And if you do that, you usually don't have much of a problem. When I'm glazing over colors that are likely to lift easily, I also use a very soft brush. So the black velvets are great for that. And you can use that lifting to your advantage if you want to pull out some highlights, which I really love to do in these spontaneous situations. So it's got a good paint that doesn't stain. And the degree of staining in the components of these colors will vary. So you may be left behind with a tint of one color and the other color kind of picked up a little more, if you know what I mean. As usual, just finding some little edges here and there. I like that little burst of blue light coming from there. That, you know, it's one of those happy accidents. I just love the way that glacier brown has separated into these various components. It just looks like I charged in another color. You can come over in some places and just kind of sharpen up a spot or two and leave the rest fairly nebulous and nondescript. That's what I like to do. I like that lost and found ethereal nature that you can get with watercolor. There's an edge and then it seems to disappear. And of course, when you're doing details like this, the granulating colors pretty much just behave like a flat color because a lot of water is involved. So it's important to remember. And as I demonstrated over here, you can paint pretty flatly with granulating colors. All right, so there's a little doodle. And you know, even if you're not interested in these, you can take two granulating colors and combine them and see what you get, you know, two of your own. If you're using an artist grade paint, you will find their charts and their information online if you want to know whether it's granulating or not. And if it doesn't say so on the tube, it might say right on the tube. If it doesn't, you know, go to their website, find out, you know, which colors are granulating. Try out some swatches like this so you understand it. I always advocate understanding watercolor. This is more about that than it is about buying Schmincke Super Granulating Colors. I wanted to cover that because they're fairly new, but it's just a good opportunity to bring to the forefront the idea of granulation, where it might be used, why you might not want to use it. But the important part is understand it. Learn which of your colors are granulating. Experiment, doodle. These things build confidence in painting. And confidence is what makes your finished paintings, your final paintings, better and better. And I'm also always happy when a review like this tells you, oh, that's something I don't need. I'm just as happy to know that that was the result of a review, and that's why I'm here. All right, so have fun with it, y'all. Go over and check out Dr. Adocano's channel. I'll have the link below if you want a detailed, very, very nice professional rundown of every single color in this range. And I thank you so much. I thank you patrons for being the sponsors and supporters of this channel and making this content possible. We will see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.